All right, and we just also going live on, if you've got friends and colleagues that would like to follow us, they can check us on the PRISA website page. And what we will also do immediately after this recording, we're going to upload this onto the Africa Brand Summit.co website. We've got a series of these. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. My name is Victor Sibeko, the current Chief Executive Officer of the Public Relations Institute of Southern Africa. Mr. Moeng is Mr. President. Once a president, always a president. He was once the president of PRISA, and I was also once the president of PRISA. So don't be surprised when you hear this Mr. President flying around. And not that we're vying to be president soon in any country.
We are. Somebody needs to take over.
Yeah, we've had our fair share. So if we come back, then it's going to be quite a big one. Welcome to this Africa Brand Summit webinar, the brainchild of Mr. Solly Moeng. And this came from the Africa Brand Summit, which is in its third year, started back by Mr. Moeng to discuss things that are very important that has to do with who we are and shape the narrative. We cannot sit and wait for other people to tell our stories. We need to jump on the bandwagon. We need to tell our stories, and there's a number of things that we need to talk about. Today, we're taking a look at a very interesting topic, the foreign direct investment, as well as the sustainable development goals, as to say what will it take for these in Africa, as practitioners, as South Africans, as business people. We need to be aware of what is happening around us, and we also need to tackle these issues head on. So I am not the one who's going to be driving this. Mine is just to offer all the technical support and welcome everybody to this monthly webinar. We are on our 8th, and the Almighty has been good and continues to be with us and guide us in this journey, which we're looking forward to hosting the final one in December. If there's any country, anyone, Mucha, you can host us there in Dubai, who would like to host the final Brand Summit, we don't mind going hybrid. We did it last year. We can have 50 people live, and the rest can attend online. But that's a conversation. We're open to suggestion and input in this regard. And we also have some awards program that we've lined up to look at the best practices and what is happening in the industry. So to lead us in these discussions this afternoon will be Mr. Phumlani Majozi, who is not new to the Brand Summit. He's also a very active participant in our webinars. And we also have Miss Mucha Nyandoro, all the way from Dubai, enjoying some really warm weather up there while we're freezing down in South Africa. So they will be leading us with the discussions. So the ground rules are very simple and straightforward. We all know we keep our microphones muted. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can either raise your hand. And if you do so, please tell us who you are and what do you do. So an apology for starters. A lot of people might be a bit slightly disappointed with this, but Professor Pielo Lumumba, who is a partner of the Africa Brand Summit series, unfortunately has a pressing issue that he had to attend to last minute. He was even unable to record and send a recording of his input to these discussions. But I'm definitely sure that we are in safe hands in the likes of Bennie van Rooy from Access Bank. He's the CEO there. And we have Neraaj from African Bank, Regional Sector Manager. Then we've got Marco, the man with a very bright profile and bright background. We're loving it, Marco. Marco, senior partner at Paul Weiss, an investor in the United States of America. Then, of course, we have our two co-facilitators, Ms. Mucha Nyandoro in Dubai and Mr. Phumlani Majozi in South Africa. Gentlemen, may I hand this over to you to drive this discussion, very interesting discussions. And to all the participants and those watching on Facebook, please, you are welcome to send in your comments, your questions, even on Facebook. We will do the facilitation to let the moderators get to know about your concerns. Over to you. Yeah.
Just a quick one. Just a quick one. I got a message from Professor Lumumba earlier. The president of Kenya is receiving a government delegation from Tanzania, and he asked Lumumba to meet with some of the group, to talk to some of the group. That's why he was not able to be here with us today. But he's very committed to this cause, and he will be with us next time, I'm sure.
Wow. Thank you. Ready.
Well, thank you all very much. Yes, I was going to say I've got a panel full of gentlemen today who are very kindly putting the lady first. So very warm welcome to everybody from the moderators here, Phumlani and me, Mucha. So today we're talking FDIs, SDGs, and all things Africa. And as you've heard, we have quite an esteemed panel tonight, this afternoon. We've got different time zones, so do bear with me if I cross over between morning, afternoon, and evening, you get the drift. But essentially, we want to talk about flows onto the continent. And as we know, COVID has been an absolute disruptor in all facets of economies, life, and all things in between. So if you start to think through maybe more broadly the extent to which FDIs have reduced, we're looking at about 16% year on year. My understanding from the United Nations Conference Trade and Development is that we have dropped 16% from 47 to 40 billion. With that, though, has been some discussion around the extent to which SDG related trade or investment has reduced. And of course, we've got a panel of experts who can talk us through what that means in practical terms, what we can expect as a continent, and more broadly, walk us through how we go about navigating perhaps the challenges that have us behind the curve as a continent more broadly. So I thought it might be a good idea. I'm going to throw Marco into the deep end because he's an investor, he's a lawyer, he can talk to policy, he can talk to all manner of things. Maybe Marco could frame for us, for people who may not be too familiar with how SDGs relate to foreign direct investment. Could you just give us an overview of the relationship between the two, Marco? You'd need to mute your line, of course. So that
you need to unmute it. You need to unmute it.
Yes.
Well, firstly, it's really great to be with everyone and such an esteemed group of people. It's actually the morning here in New York, and it's also an extremely hot day for the city. But it's a great way to start the day. Speaking to fellow Africans, and it's the way I've started the day since I started my journey of investing in a sports team in South Africa, and it's been a wonderful experience. I am part of the group of foreign direct investors. And I think you said what astonished me, Mucha, is this is not an issue I practice in. My practice in New York City is in the private equity area, and most of my clients, are not investing in Africa. They've thought about it over the years. I remember helping to raise a pool of capital, the AIG Infrastructure Fund. Many years ago, but it's not an area of focus, and it surprises me, and I'm surprised, by the numbers you cited. I think you said, during the pandemic, basically foreign direct investment has reduced 16% to something like $40 billion from $47 billion, and what surprised me about that is the number. $47 billion, that it's such a small number with a continent of young, connected, talented people. So maybe as I explained to Solly, I think my role on this panel is maybe to give you a little bit of my thinking of why I invested as a foreign direct investor. Is that okay with you?
Perfectly fine. And what I recognize is the audience may not have picked up perhaps on what you do. So maybe just give a little bit of context of what you do. No, that's fine. I didn't ask you, so I put my hands up to that. But perhaps a little bit of context so that your narrative then relates to what you actually do.
Sure. So I'm a practicing corporate lawyer in New York City. I've been at a law firm called Weiss for 28 years. And Paul Weiss is one of the big transactional law firms in the United States. The firm does a lot of the big strategic transactions, many of which are related dollars that are more than $47 billion. Just one of them, just to give you a sense. My practice area within that transactional practice is in the private equity area. And what I do is I help clients effectively raise private equity funds that are invested in by sovereign wealth firms, major family offices around the world, government and state plans. And those private equity firms then go and invest those dollars that they raise across the marketplace in infrastructure projects, in major businesses, in venture capital and growth capital. And I've been doing it for more than 2 decades. These firms are creative and innovative people, and they typically go to the places, sometimes in the emerging markets, sometimes and rarely in Africa, where they think there's opportunity to make a return for their investors. So that's what I do as a living. But I'm also an expat South African. I'm from a town called Masotti in South Africa, and I spent the first 23 years of my life in South Africa. I didn't make an active decision to immigrate. I came to study for a year in the United States on a government scholarship, and I stayed. But in staying, I remained connected to South Africa, mostly through philanthropy. I maintain an interest in South African culture and everything South African, and really believed and continue to believe in the country. I went back as an election observer at the first democratic election. I clerked, even while I was working at a New York law firm, for the Constitutional Court for Justice L.B. Sachs. Believe in the democratic values of the country, believe that the rule of law is deeply embedded in the country, fundamentally believe in the education system and the talent and the hard work of South Africans who are thriving all around the world. So I kept a very deep-seated connection, to the country. And, in recent years, in the middle of pandemic, and maybe it was, the lunatic in me, seeing a certain Siya Kolisi lift that trophy, and I was there in Yokohama, Japan, and seeing what sport can do for character building, for community building. Really started seeing rugby and sport as an opportunity, not only as an investor, but to do things around the sport, using the brand and profile of the sport. I think live sports, around the world is an investment opportunity. It is an investment opportunity in South Africa, given some of the economics and given that you're operating in a massive market in the same time zone as Europe. And so, I plunged in and I wanted to do it in a way that brought expat South Africans, because I suspect a lot of the foreign direct inflows that you're speaking about are, expats from the different, at least a chunk of that number, a chunk of that $40 or $47 billion are expat South Africans or Africans, reinvesting in the countries of their birth. But I wanted to reinvest, and I wanted to try and do it well. So I thought, how can I contribute? And so I went to some very prominent expats, South Africans, and I said, come join me, come join me and revisit South Africa, revisit, in this case, we invested in a rugby team called the Sharks, located in Durban, revisit the country. And so I reached out and I got other people joining me on the journey. So it was some expat South Africans. I also, thought that, in investing, want to bring technical ideas and skills. And so I reached out to owners of other sports teams. We have the owner of the Milwaukee Bucks, who just won the NBA championship, owner of an NHL team called the Florida Panthers, owner of a Serie A team called Spezia. And, with that ownership group, people who believed in the country, people who brought back to the country, people who brought different ideas and skills, we hope to do something special there. So sorry to be so long-winded, but that was our journey at the Sharks. And investing, you understand it's not just about investing, it's about social development. It's about making a social impact. And South Africa went through a hard time recently, especially KwaZulu-Natal, with some of the rioting and food shortages. And it was amazing to see how the investor group and how the Sharks Rugby franchise responded to their social obligation to the community. It came out of investing, and it was important, and it was an important part of it. So
very good. Thank you very much for that. And I think, it's really interesting to hear that framing of diasporans who've left home, gone abroad, but still have that heart to plug back into the country from which they originated. I would like to go across to Neraaj, if I may, Neraaj, just to get that definitional piece in place. So for that sort of person who may be wondering what SDGs have to do with foreign direct investment, or what indeed the concept of foreign direct investment is, could you let us know, please, at a high level, what they are and how the two are related, perhaps having contextualized what you do at the Development Bank initially? Neraaj, that was for you.
Thank you, Mucha.
Thank you very much.
Do I need to introduce myself, or?
If that's okay, just to give some context, that would be helpful.
Okay, sure. So good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Neraaj. I work with African Development Bank, which is a premier multilateral institution based out of Africa and owned by African countries. And so I'm based out of the bank's Pretoria office, which covers the Southern Africa region. I focus on industry, agriculture, and human development. Now, coming to this distinction between FDI. So FDI is foreign direct investment. So this is in terms of technicalities, it's differentiated from FII, which is a foreign institutional investment. And typically, FDI is investment in long-term projects. So it creates long-term value addition in the countries of investment, as compared to the short-term portfolio flows, which happens through the capital markets. And now the linking of FDI with SDGs. So SDGs are Sustainable Development Goals, which came out of United Nations. And the objective of SDGs is to improve the well-being of people living in the countries. So the two, FDI and SDG, they get connected when FDI is invested in areas which improve the long-term well-being of citizens of the people. And if we look at SDG sectors where typical FDI comes in, it is infrastructure, renewable energy, water and sanitation, food and agriculture, health and education. So if the FDI, foreign direct investment, comes into the country and is invested in these sectors, then that is connected to SDGs, because it leads to the long-term improvement of the living conditions of people in that country. But if FDI comes in sectors which are not in these areas, then that is not connected to SDGs. So that's a brief explanation. Thank you.
That's very good. And the reason I asked what might appear a very elementary question is that there is typically a broad range of people who watch these sorts of discussions. So it's always helpful to put some frame around it. What I do tend to know is that a lot of the popular SDGs, if you like, are around ending poverty, protecting the environment, and prosperity, water provision, etc. So I think the environmental issues tend to take the lead more often than not. And it's always interesting to then bring in the financing for the larger projects, the impacts those might have on environments and so forth. But over to Phumlani, who I believe has got the next question.
Thanks, Mucha. It's great to be here on this webinar to participate again. As Victor said, I'm a regular with the Africa Brand Summit, so I've known the guys quite well. So it's great to be back. Bennie, I want to go straight to you, sir. And perhaps as Mucha has been doing with the other guests, we'll contextualize first as to what you do. And then the question you could answer for me and for all of us who are listening here is around, I talk a lot with people around where I stay and people I communicate with, how I see people sort of, talk on social networks. And some of the comments they make, Bennie, is that, well, we don't need foreign direct investment. We should do things ourselves as African. Let's localize. Let's try and keep the market closed. We shouldn't allow foreigners to come, and control things in the country. So we should push for localization. I guess my question to you, Bennie, is: do we need foreign direct investment as Africans? Do we need that?
Phumlani, thank you. Thank you for the easy question that you're asking me also.
I thought that would be difficult.
So if I can maybe start to both Solly and Marco. So Solly and I usually talk president to president because I was once the president of my local school's rugby club. It's unfortunately not a club that Marco would invest in, because the club is in an area that's possibly the nemesis of the Sharks at this stage, in the Pretoria area. So I don't think Marco wants to know too much about the Bulls at this stage in his investment tenure of the Sharks, and I don't think it will be on the horizon of an investment manager that Marco represents. Well, from a background perspective, from Lazi, I'm a boarding accountant, so that implies that I have absolutely no personality. So I already apologize for that to start off with. And just career-wise, yes, I'm at heart, I'm a development banker. In my previous career, I also engaged with Neraaj on a few occasions. So I was the CFO and acting CEO of the Land and Agricultural Development Bank of South Africa, a agricultural development, or the only agricultural development in South Africa that at that stage did wonderful work in unlocking support, what Neraaj would have referred to as foreign direct investments, and utilizing that for all sorts of agricultural products in South Africa, which supported the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals that Neraaj also referred to. At this stage, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Access Bank South Africa. The bank was previously known as Grow Bank. Grow Bank was also intended to be a commercial agricultural bank. The bank lost within a very short space, partly COVID, partly other reasons, the support of its then shareholders. And Access Bank of Nigeria, which is one of the largest banks in Nigeria, quite a well-known, recognizable brand across the African continent, always wanted some sort of a presence or banking license in South Africa. And they acquired the banking license from the existing shareholders. The transaction was concluded or became unconditional in May this year. The bank was rebranded as Access Bank South Africa and is now trading as Access Bank South Africa. Access Bank is a commercial bank. So operating in about 12 African countries, also has a fully licensed bank in the UK, rep offices in the Middle East, where Mucha is feeling the heat of the desert at this stage, and as well as in Southeast Asia, China, and the Far East as well. And it's got about more than 45 million customers, mainly retail customers. Significant number of branches, more than 4,000 branches across the continent. So that's just from a background perspective. As I said, I'm very passionate about agricultural financing, which is, as Neraaj pointed out, is one of the sectors that's a target of the so-called SDGs. So one thing about banking and investment in general is we try to make it extremely complex in a way that neither Solly nor his cat can understand exactly what we mean. So we use quite fancy and exotic acronyms and abbreviations. We talk about SDGs and FDIs and PDs and LGDs and all sorts of matrices that it almost makes us sound very sophisticated, and almost we exclude ourselves from the rest of the population because no one knows what the hell we're referring to. When the concepts, as Marco alluded to, is basically getting a bunch of like-minded people, unlocking funds, investing it in something that makes sense and would hopefully generate long-term value and can make a meaningful difference to either the communities or SDGs also as a focus on both social and environmental objectives as well. Unfortunately, the SDGs, I'll get you answer, Phumlani. The problem with the FDI part is you need investment from somewhere. You need somebody with cash or deep pockets or a wallet to unlock funding and invest it somewhere. Now, if we look at just South Africa as an example, we don't have a number of investors with deep pockets that are able to invest money in South Africa because you need to raise money from somewhere. So the issue about investment is to bring challenges, opportunities together, or supply and demand together to find a demand. So there's an opportunity to fund somewhere to a community project or a project. You need to find the sources of funding to fund that. So to simply answer your question, there is so much, especially in the agricultural space, that I'm quite involved with, and sure Neraaj can collaborate or not, agree or not with me, but there's so much foreign funding available to support social upliftment on the African continent. And so the opportunity is there. I mean, I'm aware of so many development finance institutions, arms of the United Nations, state pension funds or provincial pension funds or sovereign wealth funds that have ring-fenced significant investments to invest in the African continent in qualifying projects. Now, the challenge we face is what constitutes those qualifying projects. And the usual challenges that these investors face is they want a jockey. Let's stick to the sports team. They would invest in a jockey, a project where they can trust whoever is the sponsor of the project to take whatever funding is utilized and apply it appropriately so that the intended SDGs can be achieved and the social upliftment and job creation, environmentally sustainable and socially sustainable practices can be promoted. So it's not about we want to keep everything internalized, everything across the African continent, and we want to keep everything to ourselves. That's not the issue. The issue is if we just look at the continent on its own, there are very few African-based investors or sovereign wealth management funds or DFIs other than the AFDB that Neraaj represents and has done such a lot of wonderful work across the continent with deep pockets that can provide billions of dollars of required investment in the African continent and support all these various programs and projects that you refer to. I mean, I'm sure we'll discuss the challenges we face as an African continent at some stage as well to understand what do we need to do, what do we need to create to make ourselves attractive to all these billions and billions of dollars that are available that can be funded and injected into the African continent.
So Bennie, you talked about personality, and I think when you speak to bankers about finance, money, and all things in between, you get the personality come through quite strongly. I've got experience having worked in that environment for very many years, so yours comes through beautifully. What I did want to say to your point, and perhaps a little bit transitioning into the challenges faced by the continent, because that is pertinent, right? Very often the investor base is looking at how bankable projects are, how viable they are. We're looking at governance, we're looking at a whole range of issues, and the risk profile on the continent makes a lot of these investment opportunities unattractive. Either that or we're not packaging them sufficiently. Could you just walk us through some of the trends that you've seen around successful pitches or successful requests for FDI?
Yeah, and if we can add another complication, Mucha, which people generally underestimate, is that investment that comes into the continent is usually in hard currency. So it's in those dollars that Marco now earns in the States, or euros, or GBP, or sterling, whatever. And then it's invested in any African country, and the country is supposed to generate sufficient local currency to repay this expensive dollar-based loan. So in addition to the bankability or the risk profile, this difference in the exchange rates between dollars and local currency also complicates matters further and makes these facilities generally quite expensive to manage. It also depends, I guess, on the mandate of the investor, whether it be a DFI or a funder or a donor or a commercial fund, because all have different mandates and different yield expectations. But to answer your question, I made the point in my fairly lengthy introduction that Phumlani almost interjected at some stage, is that it's the jockey is important. Investors trust, of course they trust a good story, but it's not that difficult to build, and I'm using the story in the positive sense. It's not difficult to build a good story around, as Marco mentioned, Asia Kulisi and the Sharks and the work they're doing, and that's not difficult. So it's not difficult to build a good story in the agricultural space. We've got X thousand hectares of land available, fertile land. We've got, can create 10,000 jobs. So it's very easy to build that business case. The difficulty is to find a jockey that can comply to all those various requirements. And because the investors have all sorts of mandates, and very specific mandates, some would be focused on only one of the 17 United Nations SDGs. Some would focus on a very specific outcome. Some would focus on a very specific industry. But somebody that can manage the project to ensure it's easy and difficult to raise funding from the African Development Bank. We can use that as an example. I'm sure Neraaj can help us further on what, from their perspective, in their criteria and their assessment, would constitute a project that they would want to support. But the outcome is important, but that jockey, that the sponsor, the people responsible for running and maintaining the project is so important. And that almost, in my view, is of all the aspects. We can discuss the nature of the project, and we'll find many of them across the African continent. But who's managing that? And how can the funder, investor ensure that the money that they have provided will be utilized for what it was intended to, and that wonderful SDG outcomes will be achieved? If I can summarize, I think that's what if you're looking for one thing that most investors will tell you is, who's that person on the racehorse?
If I can just can I supplement that? I agree with that entirely. And as wonderful as Sia and the Sharks are, it was the relationship of trust with some of these investors, the human beings involved. A great CEO, long-term relationships I'd built with an investor group that gave them comfort to, invest in, some of them in a sport they'd never heard of before, in a region where they've never invested before. So it is that jockey who's critical.
Yeah, Marco, just one thing to highlight, Marco. I'm from KZN as well, so Amazimtoti, that's my hood. It's great to connect with you, and we're speaking from New York, so it's awesome. But Marco, my question here is the clients you've worked with, the people you've worked with. You are saying that they don't invest as much in Africa compared to other regions around the world, and I would love to hear from you. What's the holdback from them? Why don't they want to invest in Africa? What do they say?
Look, I think that's a complicated issue, and how much time do you have? And I'm sorry I don't have the same jokes available to me as our trusted banker who claims he doesn't have a personality, but has one. Look, I think that. Look, they invest, and literally there's so much liquidity around the world. There is so much money out there, so much, and that needs to be invested, and it is increasingly the case. But it's still going primarily to the countries in the developing world. For these. Look, if you present them with a great idea and it's coming from the right person, they are open to the discussion, they're open to making a great return. But Africa, and I think mostly about South Africa, it's still a little bit of a country of mystery. Like when you're sitting here in New York and you've got, 200 countries around the world and options to invest in, there's a lot of competition, and the challenges that the country have faced. The recent riots are just another bad news story that has to be overcome. The weakness of the currency, the concerns that came out of the Zuma presidency, just linger large, and again, provide challenges that need to be overcome. But I think if you, there just need to be a lot better messengers. There's just so much resourceful human capital, in the country. As I said, there is, the things that investor cares about. There is a deep-seated belief in the rule of law. I fundamentally believe that. I invested my own hard-earned dollars in Durban recently, and it's because I believe in it. And look, I want to do so in a way that helps to force other people to have the same belief. So
would you agree with me, Marco? Here's my assessment of Africa, because I sort of do I try and push to do some work in the media around the socio-economic challenges of Africa. Here's my assessment. We have a greater challenge in Africa, we as Africans. It's our responsibility to be able to attract that investment. By that, it means that we need to pursue the pro-business, pro-market reforms. I strongly believe in that. We need to fix the rule, law and order, the rule of law in our countries, which is lacking, Marco, in many, according to many metrics. We need to fix our political situations, right? We need to have political stability. When you look at what's happening in Central Africa, there's so much conflict, there's violence. You look at the issue of security in East Africa, in West Africa as well with Boko Haram. We just recently, right now, as we speak, Mozambique is dealing with ISIS-linked terrorists there as well. And there's a huge responsibility for us as Africans to fix those issues before and then we can attract, or we can at least make a case that actually, Marco, tell your guys to come here, and invest more. Would you agree with that, with those challenges in Africa?
Look, I do. Look, I will tell you, sitting in New York, boy, I get on the phone with my mother every day, and I hear about the bad news everywhere. In Indonesia, in Australia, there's a COVID, there's a new COVID case of a young person. I hear bad news every day, and we all, and a lot of it does. I grant you, a lot of it does come out of Africa. But at the same time, you have to, there has to be a new way of thinking. Like I do, in my core, fundamentally believe that, look, this is a transformational time for the world. And it is for, and I'm thinking about sub-Saharan Africa. It is for Africa as well. It's not, you can think of all, and it has to come from Africans. You can think of all the bad things around the world, but boy, it is a transformational time to be living. My son just started at a crypto, at a blockchain venture capital firm, and I'm learning. That industry is going to go from $1 trillion this year to $8 trillion by this time next year. There are smart and talented people who, if they think in a different way, and again, I'm thinking about mostly South Africa, and forgive me, there are so many opportunities available to the country. Yes, there are those challenges, but with, you know, it really does come from leadership and judgment. You need a few good leaders to make good decisions, and you can get the country on the right path.
Okay, so let's focus a bit on that then, this idea of decision making, transformative change, etc. I'm keen to understand, you know, how we get things so horribly wrong, right? So if you think about the resources that we sit on as a continent, the human capital we have at our disposal, we're resource rich, the list goes on. But there is a lot to be said about how we manage it all. And I think, you know, when you think about blocks such as the European Union, what they've done well is to organize themselves. I know that we've got our free trade agreement in place now, but I still feel that as a continent, we're quite fragmented in our approach. And I wanted to talk about regional integration. Is this something that can realistically happen in a shorter to medium term, do you think? Neraaj, I might point this one to you. And what do we need to have in place to actually start to, if you like, experience that integrated national financing in terms of frameworks, how those are rolled out, how they're taken on board, and their effectiveness, quite frankly?
Okay, before I address that, I would just like to add to the discussion on whether FDI is needed. So FDI is needed not just for money, because FDI also brings lot more other things, including new technology, including business practices, including management expertise. And this is why even you will see even the most developed countries on the planet have FDI. So they have countries outside of them investing in these countries. So the question is not whether FDI is needed or not. The question is, how do you align FDIs with your national priorities and make sure those FDI which is coming in is in your best interest in the long term. So now coming back to this question of regional integration, of course, well, Africa is the least integrated continent globally. So only around 15% of Africa's trade happens within Africa, whereas the number is 65% for Europe. And this is also the biggest opportunity with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is beginning to take shape, starting 1st January of this year. And as this makes progress, the opportunity for the continent is going to multiply. And one of the reasons for low FDI into the continent is also because the individual market sizes are really very small. If we look at from the global scale perspective, and that reduces the attractiveness of the continent for the foreign investors. And once we have this continental free trade area coming up as one large market, increasingly, so the attractiveness of the market is going to multiply for these potential investors. And one of the key areas of opportunity which is being seen as is setting up special economic zones around these continental free trade areas. And what if you see as if you look at the examples of Asian economies like Korea, and even China to a large extent, they went through this approach of special economic zones where you can actually create a kind of a sanitized, controlled environment, and all the other challenges which you just talked about, policy predictability in terms of having the right anchor investors, having stability of operating environment. All of these things are easy to implement in controlled special economic zones rather than in bigger countrywide areas. So setting up these special economic zones in a one large free market is actually the biggest potential opportunity for the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And you know what, it's triggered a thought in my mind, which is to say, when you think about the external pressures that are put on the continent by some of the larger institutions, I think the IMF is either loved or hated by many for a range of reasons. One of them being, for SDGs particularly, there was an allocation of 15% of GDP that was supposed to go towards SDG related activity. Now, if you're thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's unlikely that you're going to prioritize some of these, what might be considered loftier ideas, where there is real need to kind of keep healthcare running, keep education going. What COVID has done is tested us in so many ways around the viability, if you like, of our educational systems, etc. I'm quite keen to find out from Bennie. On the financing side, that there is a over-dependence in my mind sometimes on FDI. So whilst we know it has its place in the world, I do believe that we've sometimes got to take responsibility for our own narratives. And sometimes that just comes with careful financial management, as it were. Talk us through some of the trends that you've seen around sort of navigating this COVID, hopefully post-COVID world soon, from an investor's perspective, and how perhaps the continent is ready to be a little bit more independent, as it were, so we're not always going out with a begging bowl.
Yeah, look, it's a very good, and again, thank you, very easy question to answer, Mucha. I have to compliment you and Phumlani.
Okay, I'm going to have to up my game, because I don't like this idea of coming across as asking easy questions all the time.
Look, I think the one challenge with COVID, it is impossible to predict the future. I think one thing we have realized over the last 15 or so months is that our planning horizons have shrunk from maybe 5-10 years to 5 or 10 days at times, and maybe subsequently move to a few months and more. But what I actually have seen is there is more potential investment available for the African continent as what I've previously seen, and there are numerous reasons. And the one side is that if you live and operate in the world that Marco lives and operate, their yield opportunities are extremely slim. So if you invest in a US government bond at this stage, you barely get a return. Like you almost get nothing. And the same applies to most first world developed world bond yields or investment opportunities. The yields are just so low. So investors are starting to look at other areas, other parts of the world where there's significant yield pickup for them. And that's there where we as and I've seen actually more of that post-COVID than before COVID. And that's where we as Africans, there have been numerous, I see the numerous comments on the chat box as well. We need to take the initiative and the ownership. And we can't fix the leadership issues that we have in the continent, not as individuals. Collectively, we can have the right mindset, and we can't necessarily fix the self-interest issues that we have across the continent. Now, investors have both qualitative and quantitative assessments that they view and assess possible investment opportunities. Now, qualitatively, there's a lot of stereotyping about Africa. It's a corrupt continent, and there's money laundering, and that's I think I'm sure that Marco hears every day when he speaks to his fellow investors about Africa. There's so much stereotyping because they haven't been here. They stereotype and use all these fancy phrases. So it's difficult to convince somebody who's used to that stereotyping part, just to invest somewhere where they just heard from when they were small that don't go there because your money will get lost or stolen or something else. So we can change and should change the narrative. It's in our interest to change the narrative and focus on those individual investment opportunities that can make such a meaningful difference. And that span across, whether it's span across a number of countries or that's ring fenced to a specific geography, one country, not so much across various entities, but find those opportunities and make an interest to sell those. We should be able to unlock so much foreign direct investment to can make a meaningful difference. But to package those opportunities in a marketable way is important. To show how those various risks, whether qualitative or quantitative risks that the projects are exposed to, and there are numerous, how those risks will be mitigated or addressed or in some shape or form, and how more and more certainty can be provided to investors that the investment will generate the necessary financial return as well as the desired outcomes. And that's actually the main issue with SDGs. The focus is not only limited to financial only. No. Sometimes investors only focus on quantitative returns, and forget the qualitative impact that we seek to achieve, the job creation, the social upliftment, the environmental sensitive issues that we need to promote, water and sanitation, or whatever the specific SPG address. So it remains how we package it. Concerns that are usually expressed in Africa is about things like aggregation, quality control. That's maybe more specific. Quality control is more so specific to the agricultural space. How do you aggregate the commodities that 10,000 smallholder farmers produce into something that's saleable and marketable and can be provided that can be exported to a mature market, and fix issues around aggregation of large scale products, fix issues relating to quality control, irrespective of the political noise or the stereotyping. I don't think there's any shortage of direct investment available, and because of, and I mentioned the yield issue at the start, but also because there's more and more pressure on first world investors to invest in other geographies in the world other than the developed world to contribute to sustainable development across the globe.
So I'm going to challenge you a little bit because I am affronted by the idea of asking easy questions. I must put that out there. What I did want to ask you, Bennie, is when we talk about sustainability, I think there are a lot of financial institutions, international ones, regional ones as well, perhaps, that are jumping on the bandwagon on all things green. So green financing, sustainable financing being a buzz expression in most financial institutions. But with that comes conditions that aren't necessarily adapt for the African market. So if, for instance, you're putting your ring fencing coal is something we're not quite there in the industrial cycle to rule out coal as a form of energy for the continent. Are we making exceptions as regionally based banks to just allow, if you like, what might seem dirty financing for a continent that does actually require it? And I do know that I know Africa's got 54 countries, so do bear with me. This is a pet peeve of mine. We are being a little bit general here because we need to. We're talking Pan-African, but talk me through what duty of care perhaps the local banks have on continental requirements.
So I think let's say the view of local banks on global requirements, because these SPGs are developed by it's a United Nations initiative, and there are all sorts of spin-off initiatives. United Nations have an environmental program, finance initiative, and all sorts of other initiatives. So I think the one danger that I've made the point sarcastically at the start, that investors and bankers tend to overcomplicate matters, and we use whatever to make ourselves sound exclusive. But we have a way to overcomplicate matters. Let's be very clear, and to try and replicate complex solutions that we have found for simple problems where we don't really understand the nature of the problem. So I think local banks are much more conscious of the specific problems that we need to address, localized problems that we have to address. Look, it's very difficult for banks to not be conscious of SPGs and not be conscious of the mandate requirements of global foreign investors. Because if you can't show that you can comply to those, you limit your ability to raise and unlock investments and funding from others. There's also an education element involved, where we as funders need to educate the beneficiaries of the products to ensure that projects, to ensure that the projects can also comply to whatever requirements they may or may not be, whatever mandate requirements they may or may not be. Some of these are unfortunately very much rules-based, but they're not so complicated they can't be complied with. I mean, in my land bank days, numerous projects were implemented in such a way where we complied to the World Bank Development or MEGA to MEGA requirements, or to World Bank requirements, or to AFDB requirements, or to European Investment Bank requirements, or some of the other leading European-based DFIs. So it's not impossible to do that in the cultural sense, but I'm cautioning against, and I think that's the point you're making, Mucha. We try to overcomplicate, and we try to make it so exclusive that, I mean, for a simple project, it appears very difficult to comply to that. So I'm very much in favor of trying to simplify, but I always say that, well, I live in the South African version of New York, which is referred to as Sandton, or work in Sandton, and not as flashy as what's behind Marco, but solutions for development projects are not developed in fancy offices in Sandton, or New York, or London, or Boston, or San Francisco, or Paris, or Frankfurt, or any global city in the world. It's developed where you genuinely understand or try to understand what is the real need of the beneficiaries that you want to uplift from this project. So, and I do think that local banks are much more adept to understand that. Obviously, they have local knowledge and they live in the environment. So much more difficult for somebody in an office next door to where Marco sits to understand exactly what are the problems that we find that we exposed to in the Eastern Cape in South Africa, or in the northwestern part of Kenya, or the southeastern part of Zimbabwe. And I can use various examples. So it's local banks are just a little bit, and that's also why we should seek partnerships as local executors or local operators with these global investors, so that there is a local presence, so they feel that there is a local presence that they can trust, and build those partnerships. And once there's a track record of success and successful implementation, there's likely to follow the more and more investments that would subsequently follow.
Thanks, Bennie.
Sorry, can I make it? I just wanted to make one or two comments in response about that, and about the narrative of Africa. I mean, I have Squawk Box on a TV, right next to me, and I'm thinking to myself, how often do I really hear? How often is Africa really communicated to me sitting here in New York? And it's very rarely. It's very, the story of Africa and what's going on in the various countries. It's very, and that is also an opportunity. I know you all live and breathe in the African business world and African financial markets, but if you're sitting here and in some respects, I'm an intermediary to a lot of that capital that's out there, and they're just not receiving the information. So, a country like South Africa certainly has to get its house in order, the right leadership, the right policies to unlock what is needed. But there needs to be a narrative that's told, and that's why what Solly and all of you are doing. Use the word branding. There needs to be a narrative that's told about the continent, and there's an opportunity to do so. Is my point.
And I'm loving that, Marco. If I could just jump in really quickly, I think it's really powerful you say that. So we've got the Dubai Expo, the Expo coming up in Dubai shortly, 50 days or so away. And it's very disheartening for some of us Africans on the ground to learn of what appears to be a lack of organization for some of our African counterparts. The UAE has made a really big effort to have MOUs with Africa. There are a lot of bilateral agreements with the continent, and this is an opportunity to absolutely shine. And I think that's brand management, brand awareness is lacking, which is something that a lot of my colleagues are fighting to change, because we are sitting on a gold mine and not doing anything with it, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I see Solly's hand go up.
So do you want to say something?
Yeah, we seem to be afraid to call a spade, and Phumlani came very close to it. And I want to know, to what extent can investors say, look, we want to put money into this economy, we want to see the impact of it, the social SDG, at a broad level, impact of it, but we don't trust the politicians, because a lot of times money comes in the politician and it doesn't end up where it's supposed to go, because investors tend to want to be too nice to politicians. In the case of South Africa, surely someone like Marco or others could say, look, we see there's a need on the ground to make a difference, but we don't want to go through politicians, or we want to make conditions. We don't want to invest in your country if you don't change the way you do things. I think that the private sector in general in South Africa and probably across the continent, and the investor community around the world, has the power it's not utilizing. They have to come up with conditions and say, we're happy to invest in your country, but you got to change. If We have to arrest people who steal money. I mean, in South Africa, the levels of impunity are massive. People get away with stuff. You know what I'm saying? If I were to go into a local supermarket and to come out with a razor blade that I didn't pay for, I would end up in jail. But people have stolen millions, and investors still play around with these people. They still play golf with them. Why? Can't investors be the instigators of this sort of thing, of change, of real beneficiation for local people?
Marco, do you want to respond to those powerful comments by Soli?
I mean, I don't know that your average investor, and I know we have this broad category of FDI, and that can range from massive infrastructure projects where there's a lot more governmental interaction to investing in a small technology growth company located in the Cape Town area. It's the typical business person is playing with the cards that they've been dealt. I think that when Donald Trump was living in New York, he was playing golf with the Democrats and the Republicans and contributing to both. So it takes a lot, I think, Soli, for sort of the massive and I'm talking about private investors. I'm not talking about the massive financial institutions or development agencies or organizations like the African Bank. They want to have the right conditions to invest, but it's a fine balance, in terms of navigating the political landscape. It's a lot to ask them, at least the private investor. I mean, I wasn't coming in, when I invested in the Sharks, I had certain threshold preconditions, for doing so. One is I wanted a local partner. You're right. FDI needs to be, a relationship of partnership. And so there's a group of, local partners on the ground, as Stephen Sard, CEO of Aspen Pharmaceuticals, the owner of Amazulu soccer team, people on the ground who understand what's on the ground, who have the relationships. So, and maybe so you get at it more indirectly. I'm sorry to be so long-winded, but it's look, I want to know my dollars are going to go where they're intended to go. So you put bells and whistles in place to ensure that's the case. But sort of macro change is hard as a condition for private investing.
Yeah, just Marco, from your position where you are in the West. When you look at Africa, are there countries, or I should say perhaps leaders, who are getting it right in terms of making sure that we are reforming our FDI policies and that we are aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals? Can you pinpoint maybe one or two leaders across the African continent who you think are promising to an extent on this matter?
I mean, I don't want to comment on any particular individuals, and frankly, I don't know that I have the basis. I don't have the basis, to do so. So I honestly prefer. I think where you're leading me is that you can't think of one either.
Well, but I can tell you, Marco, I can tell you the countries that I feel I think they are getting it right from economic reform, from progress point of view, socio-economic progress. I would say Rwanda has been, getting it right, given where they were just 27 years ago. I would say in West Africa, Ghana, I think I'm quite happy with the direction. The political stability, the push to have proper economic reforms. I would say Botswana as well. Mauritius, in South Africa, we hear many people are migrating to Mauritius, where because they're flat tax rates, business operations are much better. So those few countries, I would say, Marco, I would argue that they are better when it comes to these things.
And I think
immigrating to Mauritius is like immigrating to the Cayman Islands, from New York. You got to be happy to be on that island.
Yeah, yeah. You want to say something, Mucha?
Okay.
Victor has his hand up.
Oh yes, thank you, Mucha.
Before I
Sure, it's hot in here. My question is to Bennie. Bennie, you've unpacked this so well that FDI is long-term for long-term projects, whereas SDGs is looking at the well-being of the communities within those countries. My question then is, aren't the African countries and those needy countries that depend on FDI putting their necks on the noose or necks on the block? Because at the end of the day, much as this is all for good intention, we all know you spend money to make money. So what is the situation if a country has found itself caught up in such a situation?
Look, I think it's almost as if there's the notion that FDI implies some sort of a ownership. So it's almost similar to how we sometimes as Africans view the Chinese money that's been that's invested in Africa, and we feel that everything is going back to China. So there's no real local wealth creation. All the wealth creation is shipped somewhere else. So I think we must be careful not to confuse FDIs with some sort of a ownership of the government, or there's some weird control that they have over a specific government. If your typical, and we talk about long-term investment, Victor, and I think that's the important part. We talk about investors who are prepared to make a 10, 15, 20-year commitment on a specific project that will have all sorts of SPG type benefits. Now, their mandates for their intended outcomes are generally social upliftment and environmentally in nature. So I wouldn't necessarily feel that there's some specific expectation from or some control of government or the decision makers in the country or so forth. I think that should be anybody prepared to invest in projects of that length, 15, 20 years, prepared to invest their market put it hard in dollars. I mean, everybody is investing somewhere as an investor somewhere that they need to keep happy, whether it's a government or whether it's a pensioners, whatever it may be. That should be welcomed with open arms. And as long as we can match the projects that we want to support locally in such a way that the investors can achieve their objectives, it should be a victory for both sides of the world. So I don't think we should see FDI as something that's intimidating or threatening or likely to change the culture or the nature of the country or the nature of decision making. That to me is something that I think we should see it as something that should be welcomed. See it as somebody from wherever in the world prepared to support meaningful and sustainable social, environmental, and economic development in an African country, and that can only be to the benefit of the communities and the citizens of the country.
Yeah, I love that you said that, Bennie. And I think what we tend to sometimes overlook is how exclusive some of these benefits sometimes are. So you find that a lot of this investment may, for instance, be on an infra project that only caters to a subset of the community. So I think sustainability for me is that big ticket holistic approach where you are looking at, the big ticket items, power, infra, skills, future skills obviously are quite topical across most platforms. Neraaj, I'd like to come to you and ask a question that one of our attendees, Sikelela Biela, do forgive me if I've not quite pronounced your name the right way, I'm Zimbabwean. The question is, what would it take for FDI in Africa to be less extractive in nature and more sustainable developmentally of skills and infrastructure? Neraaj, would you be okay to take that one for us?
Okay, sure. I think so I would try to understand the question first. So what is meant by extractive?
So extractive as in we're just take. But
so does it mean that investment in commodity sector, or does it mean it is not in the benefit of the citizens of the country? Yeah,
I think it's a more broad sort of mindset. So it being very much a take mentality rather than we're doing this for generations to come. And Sikelele, please do let me know if this is what you're thinking, but that's certainly my interpretation of your question.
Yes. So what this is where I think I would like to come to like to describe the investment approach of African Development Bank. So when African Development Bank gets involved in a project, we focus on local value addition. So we invest. We do not invest in direct shipment of ore kind of projects where typically the investors come in, invest in commodity sector and take the ore out of the continent. So our intention is to create to set up facilities which promote local value addition, and this is across the board. We invest a lot in long-term infrastructure across energy, across industry, and across other sectors like education and healthcare. We are investing a lot in skilling, and any project that we invest in, there we ensure that the investors take into account the well-being of the local communities. Local communities have a participation in the project, and they benefit from the project outcomes. So I think it is when we move towards sustainable development in the longer term. So this is an approach that we should promote for all the projects that come in the national in any country, and this is exactly the role of African Development Bank, because our role is to act as a catalyst and also to invest in projects which can act as a demonstration that this can be done. That even while you are investing in projects in a sustainable format, you can still make money out of it, and these projects are bankable, and investors can make good returns out of it, even while contributing to the long-term well-being of the communities. And so this is an approach that needs to be adapted at the national level, and African Development Bank is playing a role by bringing in all the institutional investors on one platform. You would have heard of Africa Investment Forum. So this is where we don't just invest alone. We bring in all the institutions, institutional investors, as well as private sector from across the globe on one platform to ensure that all the projects that are taken through this platform are managed in a sustainable manner. So I think this is an approach that we need to propagate across the board. And we are working with the regional member countries to ensure that. Thank you.
Phumlani, you're muted.
Oh, I just spoke on my own. Sorry about that. So, Bennie, I want to shoot this one to you, and I promise I won't interject at this time. My question is, people tend to say what happens in South Africa is that we have these big corporations or these big investors who come and invest, make money for themselves, and then they run away, go back. The point they are making is that poor people on the ground, people, the lower class in the country, in townships, in squatter camps, you could go as far as that they don't benefit anything from this so-called foreign direct investment. How do we make sure that those poor people on the ground, they do benefit from FDI? Any way we can do that?
Phumlani, it's a very valid concern, and I use the Chinese example, and maybe also a bit of stereotyping, but that's generally the concern that people have about Chinese investments. Is exactly what you mentioned. It's value extraction, and the value extraction or the value generation doesn't take place locally. What you explained in poor communities or beneficiaries, they need it. And it feels like whatever is produced or whatever commodity is produced is exported to the homeland, and the wealth creation sits there. So look, I think what you need to understand, Marco eloquently put it as some sort of say that he wants to know that his hard-earned dollars that he invested, that he can get a return on them. So there is that element of investors expecting, if it's a equity investment, expecting a return in the form of dividends and growth of the investment. If it's in the form of a loan being granted, that the loan can be repaid and the interest on the loan can be paid. So there's that element that it shouldn't necessarily be consumed with value extraction. That's just the compensation that an investor expects, which is not unusual, abnormal expects. But the other part, and I think Mucha in one of the initial questions mentioned that it's how we package the projects in such a way that we can ensure that the true beneficiaries are those poor communities and poor people that you refer to, that when there is something like job creation, there's meaningful job creation, sustainable job creation to the unemployed, and not job creation for the same corporates that get all the benefits time in and time again, and specifically not only limited to South Africa. I think that same question would apply to other African countries as well. But there is the responsibility on those of us responsible for packaging these products or developing these projects, in such a way that the projects will result in that the beneficiaries or the poor or the communities that we want to benefit, that they benefit with what is needed. What is needed is sustainable job creation, development of infrastructure, hospitals, education, critical aspects, agricultural projects, food security issues. Those are the issues that we need to address. And if we, there's that old story about if you want somebody to eat, don't give him a fish, teach him how to fish, and then hopefully he'll be okay for life. So we don't want to just hand out donations the whole time and here's something short term and off we go. We want to create meaningful employment. We want to address meaningful food security issues, community upliftment on a sustainable basis. And if we develop the projects or when we create these projects, we want to get funded and support in such a way that we achieve that, we'll hopefully go a long way to break that notion or concern that you very appropriately ask in your question, Phumlani, about the no real benefit and the wealth creation being transferred somewhere else.
Yeah, I will follow up with, there's one question from one of the attendees here, Bennie. It goes like this: trade negotiation from a regional power bloc position has been identified as one of the opportunities for fair trade and bilateral agreement between Africa and the world. And in answering the question of how FDI can be less extractive, is this an area that should be looked at by, say, the AU? In other words, if we go as a bloc and we trade with the world, would that work? Would it help?
I think the first thing we need to get right is the trade relationships between the various neighboring countries in Southern Africa, if I can use Southern Africa as an example. Unfortunately, a lot of the revenue generated by governments is revenue generated through all sorts of taxes and tax requirements and import duties and export duties and so forth. And it's been quite a sustainable source of revenue for various governments. And that's why we have this very exclusive tax treaty or import-export duty arrangements in Southern Africa. And this whole new trade bloc or trade negotiation or trade discussion taking place to take those prohibitive import-export duties away is actually quite important. So, and I mentioned in one of my answers to one of my questions that one thing we need to get right is the whole principle of aggregation. That we have I would rather want to see 5 large projects being successful that can benefit multiple individuals than trying to manage 50,000 small projects where the beneficiaries are roughly the same. So, and that with these multi or large space products can definitely be managed or executed across various countries, which would obviously help. Now, the question about FDIs and trade restrictions and so forth, I think it's a little bit less relevant, to be quite honest. I think we need to make countries a friendly investment destination. There's a number of policies, government policies involved in making our countries of more of a friendly and more attractive investment destination. That's an element of that. But again, I want to reiterate, in my view, in my experience, there's no shortage of investments available. Liquidity, as Marco put it, available for investment in the African continent. We just need to find the appropriate ways to unlock that.
Very good. And as we look to start wrapping up, given the time, one for any of the panelists, so Marco, Neraaj, Bennie, the idea of aggregation is always going to stand out as, there's power in numbers, right? So it's beyond the aggregation of projects, there's the aggregation of ideas, that sort of thought management, thought leadership, which perhaps we fall behind on. And as you watch some of the developments happening in Kenya, for instance, where you've got large multis going in, setting up shop and benefiting, if you like, from the intellectual capital coming in from Kenya, but we're not the beneficiaries of our own knowledge, something there needs to be redressed. What I wanted to ask either of you or any one of you is the role that you see technology playing in the future of trade on the continent, the role that technology will play in repositioning Africa, if you like, as the powerhouse it ought to be.
Okay, if I can quickly come in, and
please do.
I'm sure. So I think technology is going to play a very important role going forward, and COVID-19 has taught us very well. Overnight, so many of us have started working from home, and the economies are still functioning. So digital revolution and the success of mobile telephony in Africa has proven that Africa is actually very adaptive of new technologies. In fact, the success of mobile banking in Africa puts it at much ahead of many of the developed economies as well, in terms of where the banking industry has leapfrogged into moving into a digital arena much faster than any other country across the globe. And I would again say that this initiation of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which would actually create one integrated market across the continent, the youth dividend of the continent, where Africa is the youngest continent on the planet, and which also makes it the adaptation of new technology very easy in terms of the youth. And to that extent, I think that the lack of strong governments on the continent, which actually make the traditional route to development very difficult. And this will also this also ensures that the young people on the continent are going to leapfrog on access to technology as well as on networking across platforms to get access to those opportunities which are not available to them through traditional routes. So I believe this is a path to success for the continent, and we are already making our contribution to it. So from African Development Bank, we are working on a regional enterprise development platform for the Southern Africa region, which will use digital technology to strengthen distribution and access, bring access to entrepreneurs in the remotest corner of the region, so that people who have access to internet, and sometimes even if you don't have access to internet, can use the latest technology to access to all the services that the platform will provide. And so this I believe is just the beginning of things, and in that sense I'm very hopeful of the future for the continent in terms of the post-COVID economies, which will be largely digital. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other points from Marco and Bennie on this? No need to, if not. I think from my end, there's so much to be unpacked in this topic. We haven't even begun to scratch the surface on the role that women play on the continent in terms of FDI, the disproportionate investment perhaps that goes into female-led enterprise. It goes on. And as the only woman on the panel today, I did need to give a shout out to my fellow women. We are worth investing in. I'm going to hand over, if I may, to Phumlani as we start to wrap up officially.
Thank you, Mucha. You know, I didn't know that you're the only lady in this discussion.
It's fine. I just called it out.
She keeps reminding us.
Interesting stats. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
But it's all great. Hey, it's great it's been great to work with you, Mucha. Mr. President and Victor, you guys can take over now. Our work is done.
Thank you so much, Phumlani. Thank you, Mucha. Mucha, you're not the only lady. There is the most powerful lady and the wind below our wings at the Africa Brand Summit, and that is Wanda Lubel, who's been doing a lot of work, IT-wise, support, and administratively. Wanda, it would be nice to see you if you could just switch on your camera and say hi to everyone before I hand over to President Moeng to wrap up today's discussions. It's been a great discussion.
Wanda, Michaela, there are a few female names I'm seeing. I just meant the active members perhaps of the panel, but no disrespect to any of the women who are here. Thanks for joining in.
No, I understand that. I was just being poetic, you know. Wanda.
Wanda, where are you?
Wanda, where are you?
I'm here.
Yes. Please switch on your camera and we'd like to see you. And say hi to everybody.
All those beautiful digital cuts that you saw with the ones with the green background and all the video, she did all that, and she's been working on some really awesome improvements on the website. And Wanda is awesome. Thank you, Wanda.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Wanda.
Yeah.
What's up?
Okay.
Yeah. And she's also been making sure that our social media platforms come live again and they become working. Right. So yeah, but anyway.
Anyway, thanks, Wanda, and thanks to the panelists, Mucha and Phumlani. You've done a sterling job, and everyone else who attended and those who attended on Facebook. We really appreciate your active participation. This recording will be uploaded onto the Brand Summit webinar. We will be bringing in another webinar next month. Next month in South Africa is Tourism Month, and not only Tourism Month, but Heritage Month as well. So we will be having our topic will be mainly based on tourism. Very interesting topic that we would like to see a lot of participation from the various speakers, which we will announce soon. So don't miss out the African Brand Summit monthly webinars on the last Thursday of the month. Mr. President Moeng, may I hand over to you just to wrap up and then
thank you very much, President Sibeko. I will not be long. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Bennie. Thank you, Neraaj and Mucha, Phumlani, all of you guys who made the time to be with us today. This is an experience for us in 2021. We always have a two-day, event, as you know. Many of you have been there from the beginning. Phumlani has been there from the start in 2018, and I'm very happy that he's still part of this family. But we want to continue with the awards at the end of the year. I think it's important to talk about the difficulties that faced by Africa, look at the opportunities, things that could be done differently, the things that need to be invested in order to enhance a more positive image of Africa globally. But we also need to celebrate those people, those individuals who are doing some really awesome things that make us look at Africa and feel, you know what, everything is not so bad, because there are some really awesome things happening in Africa. There's no doubt about it. We can complain all we want, and there's a lot of negative stuff that gets said about Africa, which we deserve. I think that we Africans need to look into the mirror and acknowledge what we see and then do something about it. But we must also celebrate those things and those people that are doing right. So we want to launch in September the award nominations formally and hold an award event in early December to celebrate those people. This has been one of the most popular parts of the summit ever since we started, and I think that we should do that. And Marco, I'm not putting into sport. We want to celebrate sports. There are awesome sports people who are doing awesome things, not just for themselves, who go back into communities and just enhance. Sports brings people together in South Africa. Sports brings people together in Africa. How do we get those successful sports people to be icons of hope for people sitting in little villages and little townships across the continent, for them to think we can become big, not just to become a millionaire and drive a big car and live in a big house, but to also bring up others and create opportunities for SDGs as well. I mean, sustainable development goals do not just rely on big guys with big money or big firms or big institutions. They also rely on each one of us. Social justice is very important. It's still very unappreciated in Africa. How do we play a role, each one of us, to make your life better for somebody else, for a child, for the community, for a little boy, a little girl in our neighborhood? I think we all have a role to play. We can't just rely on others to do that for us. But anyway, thank you for being part of this community, and I hope that you stay, all of you, part of this community as you grow this this project over time.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Have
Thank you,
a lovely
Mucha.
evening.
Thank you, Phumlani. Have a lovely evening. Meet to see you next month, the last Thursday of the month. That will be the 30th. The 30th, yes.
Okay.
Great. Ready.
Bye-bye.
Bye.